Have you ever wondered what it would be like to move to the block as a first generational farmer? Have you thought about how you're going to fit everything in if you're balancing farm life with another job or another role? How are you going to logistically fit in that job, that role, and raising your children on the land? In the case of an incident, an accident, or the illness of a child, what are your action plans and what are your steps to make sure that you can look after that child while you're waiting for the ambulance, while you're waiting for them to get to hospital? These tips, tricks, and advice have been given wholeheartedly and openly by Sarah, a paediatric nurse. So let's jump into today's episode to talk about all this and more. Hi, and welcome to the farm. Today we're talking, you've married the farmer, now what? We are talking to Sarah today. Sarah, can you please introduce yourself, your background, and how you came to be on this podcast?
Thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to be on this platform. My name's Sarah Duncanson. So I am first and foremost a mum of 4 beautiful children aged 8, 6, 4 and nearly 2, 3 boys and a little girl. My job is as a paediatric intensive care nurse. So I work at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne and I've been there for 16 years, predominantly working in the intensive care unit, looking after some really sick and severely injured children. About 5 years ago, my colleague and I decided that more and more people needed to know what to do in those moments pre-hospital, and that there were many hospital staff in rural and regional areas who were receiving children into their care but hadn't had specialised training. So we took our skills and our knowledge out there into the rural and regional areas and started teaching healthcare professionals all about paediatrics, which we continue to do this to this day. We've reached out to you and want to be on the podcast to sort of spread the word about keeping kids safe and what to do in those pre-hospital moments, and also tell people what we can do for them when they live in rural and regional areas with kids, and also kids who have special needs and complex medical conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. A wealth of knowledge that you have that is so needed out here rurally and especially on farms, because when we do need to make those calls or take the kids to the hospitals, like, we don't have a small way to go. Some of us have hours to travel or we've got to wait for the flying doctor. So having the key skills in place to be able to manage that situation the best that we can is so vital. So Sarah, tell me a little bit about your connection to the land and the farming operation that you find yourself on, as well as everything that you are doing.
If you want something done, ask a busy person. I grew up in regional Victoria. My grandparents were third generational farmers in a central western farm where we spent the majority of our childhoods. That's where my mother grew up and we learnt many lessons on the land with them. My mother was the eldest daughter of 5 children. She had one brother, an older brother, who went on to take on the family farm. He unfortunately didn't have any children, so the family farm is actually sort of ceasing very soon as he retires, which is a bit sad. But many childhood memories growing up and going out in the paddocks with Pa and Nan and just learning so many beautiful things about the land and what that means to be a farmer, but also how to really take care of it. My grandmother, my Nan, was she just excelled in animal husbandry. She was just such a beautiful carer of animals, and she just took care of every single one of them. She was a prize goat owner. She won many, many awards for her gorgeous Angora goats. And we would often have sort of little pet ones on school holidays. So yeah, many beautiful memories and many lessons that we learned on the land. My parents would love to have had a farm, but couldn't afford it. I was one of 6 children, but we grew up in regional Victoria, and we spent the majority of our childhood out in rural Australia, camping under the stars. We travelled around Australia as kids for almost 9 months in a 4-man tent. We had a really wholesome childhood that encompassed so many lessons that you learn when you actually live on the land as well. So we felt like we had a really great opportunity to learn the things that you would learn if you were on farm. My husband and I worked in the city for 10 years before we actually moved out back into the country. Once we decided to have children, we wanted to move out of the city. So we sort of progressively move further out, and this is where we find ourselves now. We're sort of northwest of Melbourne, in between Melbourne, Ballarat, towards sort of the Daylesford region. And we have a small property. So we have a small property that we just use for grazing at the moment. My husband works in agricultural chemicals, manages our small property, and I obviously work still at the Children's Hospital as an intensive care nurse and help out when I can. In time, we may increase our capacity on the farm, but in saying that, at the moment, we are at our absolute capacity.
Let's take a break in today's episode to give a shout out to one of the supportive links in today's episode, the Thermomix TM6. Cook smarter, not harder, with the Thermomix TM6 and Cookie Do subscription. This is the Thermomix exclusive recipe library with access to thousands of step-by-step recipes on the screen of your new Thermomix. Experience features such as menu planning and inspiration for food ideas, plus the freedom of cooking for your family and making their favourites hassle-free. The TM6 is your second hand on the kitchen, replacing over 20 different appliances in chopping, blending, whipping, weighing, milling, kneading, mincing, searing, surveying, and much, much more. To find out more about the TM6, click the link in the description below. If you are also looking for a side income and are wanting to try the Thermomix for yourself, as well as selling it to friends and family, please also click the link below, a message saying Thermomix TM6 now. Now let's get back to today's episode. Tell me about the process to acquiring the small property that you have. A portion of our listeners may not have married their farmer yet. They may still be trying to secure a small property to start their journey. So can you tell me how you went through that process, balancing the kids and the work?
We were really serious about wanting to be out in the country. It's really difficult to get land. There was sort of 1 acre blocks, in rural towns. Or there was massive properties that we were not in a position to really either purchase or manage, and we didn't want to sort of get out of our depth too quickly because it is so much work. Even on a small property, there's still inherent risks and there's constant work that needs to be done. And so we bought a property that backed onto an existing farm, and they'd sold off some parcels of land. And we knew that in time there might be more to become available, or if just being in the area, we might be able to access more land. We're really lucky because we bought at a time where it was more affordable than what it is now. We have a lot of farmers in the family, so we've really lent on them for support and wisdom, guidance, use their knowledge and their skills. My sister and her husband owned a property in Nil, and during the drought it was just too difficult, so they actually moved all of their livestock and property down here. They've been a huge support for us, and so it's been a really beautiful time of learning and being open to learning and open to new ideas, and using the people who have the skills and knowledge. I think has been our biggest learning hurdle.
Absolutely. How do you approach asking? Do you ask the small questions of them more often, or do you sometimes sit back and try and problem solve and come to them with a solution or a part solution just for reassurance? How do you usually have those conversations?
We're really lucky because we're very, very close with my sister and brother-in-law. Look, the first couple of years of lambing, they were my lamb hotline at all hours of the night and day when I was concerned about, one of them getting stuck or something happened, foxes getting them, I'd be calling them. But I've certainly learned a lot, and also learned to just let nature take its course, because often it does just work itself out. We unfortunately live on a hill and we can see our paddocks, and every night during lambing season I'm out there with the spotlight just checking on my lambs. So I think I've got a little bit of my nan's animal husbandry. I get really sort of, sentimental about them. My husband thinks it's quite funny, but certainly I think you learn. You don't harden, but I think you just learn that things happen on farms, and there's sometimes you can't do anything about it. They're always there to support me, and they never make me feel ridiculous for the questions I ask. I'm a pretty open person, and maybe that's, being a nurse, we're pretty open and happy to talk about anything. So I'm not afraid to ask them the small questions. I probably struggle most with the big questions and the big decisions around farming, because it's something that's not natural to me, and it's a little bit of a different headspace. You really have to engross yourself in the conversation. It's not something that you can just sort of sit there and take in little bits. You actually have to fully engross yourself in the situation and spend time talking about it once you've had that conversation about what your next steps are. We're at the process at the moment of, changing our sheep breed. We're having those sort of big discussions at the moment about how we do that and what types we get. It's great. It's a great learning process. It's so different from what I do on a daily basis. So yeah, it's fantastic.
It's almost like your holiday, because sometimes they say a change is as good as a holiday.
The Palmers would have been probably a lot easier, a little less stressful. But I think, for me and, for my husband too, he was one of 5 boys and he grew up in rural Australia. And I think we look at our children and the lessons they're learning, and sometimes I look at them and think, it would be so much easier being in town where we could walk to a local cafe or walk to a park or catch up with, friends who are just around the corner. There's so many hard things being out here, but there's also so many beautiful things, and they certainly outweigh the hard things. And I think we especially saw that during the pandemic, where, our children were able to roam around our property and, ride their bikes and go and chase sheep and fish at the dam where there was other children who were locked up. And it really made it very obvious that we've made the right choice. And I think that's the thing. We are not generational farmers. We chose together to come out to the farm. So I haven't married a farmer. We have almost married the land together. And that's, I guess it's an interesting concept that doesn't happen that often.
Yeah, that is so beautiful. And I see so many people wanting to do that, to pursue land and to pursue the lifestyle. So I really love that you've been so open with the time frame that has taken, and that you really need to commit to the idea and commit to the journey of doing that. Everything in farming does take a long time, and it does need, consideration. So thank you for being so open on that. You mentioned that, you acquired the land before your children came, and now you have all your kids on farm with you, plus what, you're doing on top of that. So tell me a little bit about how things had to change when you were having your kids and now with them being on farm with you. So we'll start with the farm block itself, and then we'll talk a bit more on logistics, because I love a good logistical chat on how to fit everything in, because I feel like sometimes we're on the same boat with all these different aspects coming in and tying them in a bow, and people say, how do you have time for that? So let's start with the changes on farm that you've had to make. Now you've got kids on with you, and then we'll go into the logistical chat of tying everything else back in.
Yeah, amazing. So I guess we were fairly lucky in the sense that there was nothing here. So we bought land, we built a house for a long time, actually, up until just before Christmas last year. We didn't have a massive shed. So we had a lot of our machinery and farm supplies sort of sitting around the property. So that was my biggest concern when I had children, and when they started walking and exploring. And I think everyone automatically thinks, and maybe all children are different, but automatically thinks that children on a farm will just roam the paddocks, from the day they're born. Maybe some do. My children didn't, and the birth order of my children has been very handy because my first is very sort of studious and cautious, and so he has really set the scene. I'm very lucky that my second child, who is my wild child, was not born first. So yeah, I guess the oldest one does sort of like taper him out a little bit. But yeah, in terms of the farm itself, we had to set very clear boundaries for the delineation between the farm and home. And because it's not a massive property, everything's sort of in close proximity. We have a very large dam on the property, which is not accessible from the house, or not easily accessible from the house, which is a great thing. But, setting the rules and the standards for our property from the get-go were very important to me. I'm not about wrapping kids up in cotton wool because it's really important they get a wholesome childhood and all the experiences of living on farm. But I think you can easily fall into the trap of adopting the mantra that they'll be right and they'll learn, and there's only one way they'll learn. We've got big families and not everyone are farmers. We had to set the standards from a very early stage about what is acceptable on our property. And look, that comes from a background of obviously working with children who have been severely injured on farms. And like I said, I don't believe in wrapping them up in cotton wool, but I know what can happen if you don't set those standards from an early stage. So I think that was probably the biggest learning from a farm perspective for us, because we don't run a massive company. There was very logistical things around fencing and around what I could manage with small children at home when my husband was away for work, what needed to be done to make life easier. I mean, I remember chasing cows, back up our driveway at 20 weeks pregnant with a toddler in tow, and coming back from playgroup down at the local park and seeing our sheep come towards us. It's been many, many adventures where I've had to, haul sheep or cows back up our driveway and stop traffic on the road. If we're going to do this, and if I'm at home with small children, we have to make this safe. We have to make this practical for me. So there was those sort of conversations and being very open. I had to be really open with my husband and say that if we can't manage this, then we can't do it, because I can't do it all. And I'm also not putting, my children at risk to save a sheep or a cow. It's not going to happen. They're the sort of bigger conversations around safety and around practicality and setting the farm up properly as well, prioritising what's important. Let's not get more livestock before we've really, really sorted out proper fencing. You can get really excited when you purchase property and you can see all the big pictures and the long-term goals, but it's all of that hard yards at the start to set it up properly that I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sarah, how do you have those conversations with such young kids, and how do you reinforce, those boundaries that you've put in place?
My kids are very, I guess, maybe lucky, maybe not so lucky to have a mum who is constantly talking about first aid and constantly talking about things, not in a scary way. Kids are very black and white and they accept things very, very easily. So if you set the standards from an early age, it becomes ingrained in their thinking. Something I think is really important for people to know is how kids' brains develop, and they develop from the back to the front. And the front is where all of that rational thinking takes place. So for a long time, they're thinking with a part of their brain that doesn't think very much at all. And so that's why they take risks. And that's why, for boys especially, theirs doesn't develop fully until sort of mid-20s. And so that's really important to know and to understand. So when you hear that saying of they'll be right, they'll work it out, they actually won't. They actually need us to guide them and teach them. Grace and I came up with something a couple of years ago when we were doing some work with farm safety around children, and it's called the triage of safety. We do it with our children all the time. So firstly, you pinpoint the risks that could be apparent on any given day that you're going out to do farm work. you work out a way that you're going to prevent them. And if that all falls in a big heap, then what are you going to do? What's your plan? So pinpoint, prevent, and plan. And that might be something as simple as, we're going down to the dam. So the risks are, my kids could drown. I've got all 4 kids on my own. We're going down there. They love the water. My almost 2-year-old will just go straight for it. What do we do from a prevention perspective? Let's make sure that the life buoy's down there just in case. Let's make sure we have just a quick conversation about don't let Elsie near the water. It's super simple stuff. And then if that all goes pear-shaped, then do I have access to emergency services? Like, how am I going to call someone? Reception on farms is not always fantastic. So, something simple like that. And the kids use it all the time. So we've ingrained that from a very young age. And I'll hear even my wild child the other day was out in the yards with my husband. They were drenching. And I heard him say to my 4-year-old, "Righto, Isaac, what could happen if we go out here with Dad?" And Isaac was like, we could get kicked in the head by a sheep, which has happened on a couple of occasions. Yes, Isaac, so what are you going to do? I'm going to stay near the fence. All right, Isaac, that's great. And if something happens, what should you do? It's like, I should run out from the fence away from the sheep. Just simple things like that. Like, actually, I hear them talking and it's not scary and we're not instilling fear in them. It's just, let's be practical about this. Hopefully, as they get into the sort of those teen years, some of that information will be retained and it's second nature to them. When they have friends over or cousins over, I have 27 nieces and nephews who are all under 10. Majority of them are boys. When they come, the kids are the ones that are actually instilling those rules. I don't even have to set boundaries because the kids are already doing it. So so that's what we do. Grace does it on her farm as well. And it means they can have a wholesome childhood but have that safety barrier.
Yeah, I absolutely love the examples that you've given, and I know that will help a lot of the rural mum community have those conversations and really reinforce that, because sometimes we feel like we have the same conversation day in and day out, and knowing how the brain works and knowing how that development is and knowing the specifics that you've just given. Thank you, because that will really help instill. This is why we have these repeat conversations, and those examples we can use in our own farming operations. So thank you very much for that.
No worries.
So tying that back in logistically, we've talked about the farm, and we've talked about what you do in your other businesses as well. So how do you, Sarah, manage all of that? Do you put it on a calendar? I know you spoke about having a lot of it in your head. So logistically, talk us through day to day. How do you get everything done and have such an amazing connection with your children as well as on the farm?
It's a bit of a challenging question because at times I feel like an epic fail. I'm actually also doing my master's at the moment, so I need to tick that off to make me feel like I'm a little bit more of a successful mum. Not because I've done my master's, but because I now have a little bit more time in my day for my kids. It's a juggle. Grace and I are both very high functioning people, and we have been all our lives. We're also nurses, so we love lists. For me, I spoke to you prior to recording that I normally keep things in my head, and that's how I'm a very visual person. So I can visualize a list and I imprint that and I know what I've got to do. But lately there has been a huge amount of admin, and there's been a change in sort of our admin the last week because Grace has won an award, and so she normally does our admin and I've taken on the role. So that's new. That's a new challenge for me. And it's another thing in my day. And so I just have to recognize that I can't keep all of that in my head. The mental load for mothers is just astronomical. And so I've taken to writing it down. I have to have a calendar and everything has to go on that calendar, and it has to be visible to everyone in the family. So, my husband has to look at that calendar every single morning to see what we've got on. It's very, very important to us as a family, and the kids can see that as well, so they know what's going on for the week. And I think that's important. If everyone knows that mum is working on Tuesday and Thursday, then everyone's happier for the week. They don't appreciate things being sprung on them at the last minute, and they don't cope with that. Kids need to know boundaries and they need to know what's happening. So calendars and lists, very important. My husband and I now sit down on a Sunday night and we plan out our week, and we talk about babysitting, who can pick up who from school, who can do the drop-offs if I'm doing training away from home. And so that's been really helpful. We also do our online grocery shopping on a Sunday night. And so that is done. It comes on the Monday morning or the Monday at some point, and that's groceries done for the week. And so that's taken a huge mental load off me. I do not go to the shops with my children because that is stressful. And, a lot of people were making me feel guilty about not taking my kids to the shops and they're not learning about what they need to buy and budget. So to counteract that, I take guilt on, as most mums do. I now give a list to my children and they have to preliminarily do the grocery shopping online for me. They've got a budget and then I sort of fix it up on the Sunday night when we have our conversation. So yeah, there's lists and organisation and calendars and conversation and open communication with your partner or husband. I can't tell you how important that is. And we have epic fails some weeks. We are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But I think I listen to a lot of parenting podcasts and a lot of common sense ones because we have a very different situation when you live rural on farm. But Maggie Dent is a fantastic one to listen to, and also Connected Parenting. I'm just going to give them a shout out because they're fantastic with that. So yeah, we don't have childcare. That's probably our biggest thing. So there's a lot of taking kids here, there and everywhere to be looked after. But as much as I can, I try and have a Monday and a Friday sort of free-ish because weekends are very busy for us on farm. And so it gives us a day to prepare and for me to get the household chores done. And then Monday, it's a sort of a day to recover and reset. And I try and do a lot of cooking for the week on a Monday if I'm home, so that meals are in the fridge ready to go. I make my kids sandwiches when I get fresh bread because it doesn't last very long in our house. I make an entire loaf of sandwiches and I glad wrap them and put them in the freezer. And then in the mornings, I take them out and they're defrosted by lunchtime. So my kids have never complained about having frozen sandwiches. Little tips and tricks like that I've learned along the way that really takes that pressure off, the mental load off, because you cannot predict what's going to happen from one moment to the next. A sheep gets out or, something happens, a tree comes down during the night and you've got to go and fix a fence, which means dinner is now at 7 o'clock. They're just some little tips that I've learned along the way.
Now let's take another short break in today's episode to give another shout out to this week's supportive link. It is Tupperware. Tupperware has you covered, whether it is from their new product range, such as their Red Dot award-winning silicone bags, all the way through to their very well-known pantry and fridge storage, not only making your farm kitchen more organized, but also making sure that your food and products are stored for longer and keep their health ratings. Did you know Tupperware also has a cooking range? Whether it is cast iron or looking at their steel knives, Tupperware really has it all now. So please visit the link in the description below and visit Tupperware. When heading to the checkouts, you can support this channel as well as the So You've Married a Farmer Now What podcast and YouTube segment by selecting Katja Williams as your consultant at checkout. We look forward to hearing from you and shopping Tupperware. They're great ones to share, Sarah, because they're so versatile and it is just what happens sometimes. And that goes back to that preparedness of what could happen during the week and what am I going to make sure we're going to be on track and we're all going to be okay and we're still all going to be fed. So I really, really love that. Sarah, is there while we're on tips, tricks and advice, is there others that you would give to anyone in the rural mum community who is about to marry a farmer or is about to purchase their first block of land? What's going to help us?
Oh, there's so many things, isn't there? I think understanding that the farm and the workplace and the home are very closely intertwined, and it is really important to understand that that is a reality and you have to find a way to escape work so that you have a home life that encompasses your kids and your husband or your partner. And it doesn't mean talking about the farm and it doesn't mean talking about work. You have to find a space where you enjoy being on farm but not talking about it. And I think that can be really challenging. And it might be something as simple as we have a space on the farm that is not consumed by livestock, that is not consumed by any machinery. It's sort of our little sanctuary. And we've even talked about putting like a little caravan on that part of the farm, because it's where we tend to go to, you know, when we have an Easter little barbecue or we have an Easter egg hunt, and we never talk about work there. It's just a bit of a sanctuary. And I think finding a space on your farm where you can do that is really important. It also means that you can have a space where you can go for you time. And I think as a mum, or even if you don't have kids and you're marrying a farmer, you need to have a space where you can be you. And whether that is going for a run on a particular path on your farm, where that's your running track, or whether there's a space where you like to go for reading or whatever you like to do, meditation or yoga. I think that's really important, because the reality is, like, it's hard to get off farm. You don't have a yoga studio that's 2 minutes away that you can go to every morning. We don't have cafes or we don't have shops. We have a pub. That is it in our area. And so I think you need to find that sanctuary somewhere, and you need to connect with people as much as you can. So that can be challenging depending on how far you are from your closest neighbours. I found that really challenging when we first moved out here. There was not that central space where we could go and have a coffee. I've now got some great friends in the area, and we literally had a paint and sip night on Saturday night. You know, it only happens once every 3 or 4 months, but it's such a special time for us, and we carve that time out. And even if it's, you know, once every 6 months, I think looking forward to something like that's important. Join a rural online mums group if you need to be able to connect. Like, technology is a fantastic way to keep in contact with people, and you can still have some very meaningful conversations with people, and get a lot out of that. So I think finding time for you as an individual is very, very important for maintaining sanity. 10 minutes a day, like that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm trying to practice that 10 minutes a day on a treadmill in our shed. No kids, no conversation, just me and just listening to my feet run on that treadmill is very, very therapeutic. And some people might think 10 minutes is not enough, but it's enough for me to fill my cup. So I think that's a really, really important message for mums. In terms of kids, just accept the fact that kids grow up differently. When they're on farm, they're a different breed, a really beautiful breed, but you do have to have some hard and soft nose. You know, we have some very hard nose around what they're allowed to ride, what they need to be wearing when they're riding on machinery or motorbikes. Hard nose around the dam and around water safety. That's huge. And then there's some soft nose that I'll just take each case as it comes. And that's dependent on a number of things. It's dependent on how tired they are at the time, because I know that that's when injuries happen. You know, it depends on how my husband's mood is, because if he is in a mood where he is not focusing properly because he's got a huge mental load, then it's no point giving him the kid to do an activity, because something will happen. So yeah, hard and soft nose are important, and working out what your boundaries are as a family and all being on the same page. You have to be on the same page, otherwise it's a living hell. So yeah, there are probably some tips and tricks for managing.
Yeah, I love those, Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing them. And so tell me a little bit about PAEDS First Aid and the business that you're running there. So tell me about everything there and how we can find more information and how we can get involved and how that can benefit us on farms and stations.
Yeah, no worries. So PAEDS, like I said, started out in the healthcare sector, teaching regional rural healthcare practitioners in hospitals and allied health clinics. Then we moved into the community, and we teach infant and child first aid, as well as nationally recognised first aid training, with a particular focus on people who care for kids or have kids around, so ELCs, kindergartens and schools, and predominantly in the regions and rural areas. And we've also branched out into the NDIS sector. So we do carer training for kids who have disabilities or complex medical conditions. And we train their parents, their carers, and also, the ELCs or kindergartens as well. In particular, from a community perspective, we have face-to-face courses, but we also have an online infant and child first aid course. And we are just about to add some rural modules to that, which are specific for families who live in rural areas, and sort of the injuries that they might encounter that are very different from those living in even regional or metropolitan areas. Maybe gory. They're very, very important for rural families to understand because they are things that we see in the intensive care unit and that we know can be prevented. They're really important modules for those families. We have a few things on our website as well that you can purchase. We've got some fantastic family first aid kits that are very, very practical and hardy and weatherproof and, you know, great to chuck in your ute or just to even have in your family home. Really important for families, even if you don't purchase one of ours, that you actually have a first aid kit. We're really, really big on that. And we have some tips and tricks on our social media around building your own first aid kit and what you need to have in it that are really essential. We're also just about to add a rural add-on first aid kit, which has some of those extra things to deal with, you know, major bleeds. And if you're having to move children from one place to the next while you're waiting for RFDS or, you know, that sort of thing. So we're about to release those as well. So you can keep an eye out on our website, which is www.paedseducation.com.au, and PAEDS is PAEDS, which is short for Paediatrics. Not feet. We're not podiatrists. We often get asked if we are feet trainers. No, we're children trainers. We also do a lot of kids first aid. So we run a lot of kids first aid classes, and they're very customized. So it depends what people are after. If we're in your area, we can do face-to-face. Otherwise, we can do online training.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for spending your time with the Rural Mum community and sharing all your tips, tricks, hacks and advice. I know that those listening will come away with some fantastic knowledge that they can implement into their farming family journey, and I know I have as well. So thank you for joining us here on the farm. I hope that you have picked up some tips, tricks, hacks and advice along the way that will help you move to the farm for the first time. If you have enjoyed Alex's story and enjoy hearing from people who have moved to the farm and who have tips, tricks, advice to give to you about making the transition easier and smoother for you, then please like, subscribe. We have also opened up sponsorship places for our social media streams, as well as this podcast and the YouTube channel. If you are a business that enjoys supporting people moving to the farm, the agricultural industry, and especially women on the land, then please get in touch via the website link in the description and show notes below. And I'd love to have a chat to you about coming on as a season or episode sponsor. If you know a rural mum who has experienced moving to the farm for the first time or across multiple farms with advice to share, then please also nominate them via the website link below. Until next time, thanks guys for joining us here on the farm, and we'll see you back here very soon.